My heart has been filled all day today with the love of this fellowship. I first became acquainted with this fellowship through C.G. White when he came to the Earlham School of Religion 2 years ago. And after he got done sharing about the ministry here, I said, C.G., I can't believe that there's a place on this earth like it. I can't believe that there is such unconditional love in one place. But I witness tonight that there is. And I've experienced it all day today. And last fall, your pastor came with Steve Reinhardt to a conference that Dr. Trueblood and I were leading, and we had asked Oliver to be a part of it because we knew that he had a ministry to share. And one whole evening was given over in that group. Remember, we had about 40 pastors there, Oliver, from all over the country. And he shared what was happening here at Scott Depot. And you could have heard a pin drop as he was sharing that message to all of us there. And he reminded me, I had forgotten this, but he reminded me when I arrived that as he was describing the fellowship here, I said to Dr. Trueblood, I said, Elton, this is Quakerism. This is Quakerism. And what did Elton say?
Elton said, I believe he said, James, what you have at Scott Depot is 17th century Quakerism.
Yeah, you see.
And I do not think from a Quaker that any higher honor could be paid. We want to thank the Lord and praise Him. He's talking about the days of George Fox and of Penn and of the great men of God that started the great movement of Quakerism. And that's what he said. I remember. You remember too, after I reminded you by God's grace.
Before the layers of institutionalism began to form, you know, and silence became something of a form. Yes. And we lost, in many places, I'm not going to say this in a generalization, but I'll say that we lost that sense of holy expectancy.
That's right.
Which is so vital to any living fellowship. And I pray to God that the Christian church will recover what William Penn called primitive Christianity revived.
Amen.
In our time. And I know we've got to start on it right here in Scott Depot, West Virginia.
Help us, Lord, we pray.
With this fellowship. This noon, I was sitting at the table at Pastor Hoag's residence, and Barbara, and I think it was Barbara who brought the cake in, and I have been a student of William Penn's, that spiritual giant of the 17th century, and some dear soul, Anna Brennan. Is she here tonight?
Yes, she is to your left.
Bless her heart. This dear soul made a cake. And on that cake were these words from William Penn, and they could have been written today.
Yes. Jesus.
About what this fellowship means and what it stands for. And let me read these words to you.
Beautiful.
Let us choose, therefore, to commune where there is the warmest sense of religion, where devotion exceeds formality, and practice most corresponds with profession, and where there is at least as much charity as zeal.
Lord.
For where this society is to be found, there shall we find the church of God. Thank you for that, Anna.
Praise the Lord.
You've made my day. Those of you who know me, these dear elders in back of me, Pastor Hoag, know of my great love for Thomas Kelly. Clarence touched a little bit on his life last evening, And I want to share a little bit more about it tonight as I begin my message, because the life of Thomas Kelly changed my life. You see, Thomas Kelly was an academician. The most important thing to Thomas Kelly in his younger years was developing the mind. Reason, the perfect reason, was his goal, you see. And he searched and searched and searched for God through coursework, through graduate study, through PhDs. The perfect reason was his goal. He taught at Earlham College, where I now make my home in Richmond, Indiana. He taught at the University of Hawaii, where he sought very hard to capture the essence of Eastern religion and Christianity, the mysticism that he felt binds both together. He sought and taught at Pickering College in Canada. And then he was finally called to speak and to share in coursework at Haverford College, and they hired him there after Dr. Trueblood, my mentor, went to Stanford University to assume the professor of philosophy there in California. And while at Haverford, he thought, what a perfect opportunity to get the PhD from Harvard University, the great center of academia in the United States. He already had his PhD from Harvard, but you see, he wanted that prize that everybody wants in the academic world, the PhD from Harvard. And so, on the days he was free, he would travel north from Philadelphia to Cambridge to work on his PhD degree. And the time finally came for Professor Kelly, at the conclusion of his coursework, to take his oral exams. Now, any of you who have experienced this know how terrifying it can be to sit at the end of an oval table with all of your professors around you while they throw questions at you about your thesis project. Oh, I get chills just thinking about it. Thomas Kelly had what his son in his biography about his father calls a woozy spell. I suppose some form of epilepsy, I don't know. My professors will tell you that I had many woozy spells during my college years, not due to any physical difficulty, however. But Kelly's was. And he failed so miserably that the professor who was working with him on this thesis project said, "Thomas, I'm sorry to have to tell you, you have failed so miserably, you cannot return." He didn't even get a second chance. And so he walked out, still confused in his mind about what had happened, walked down the hallway, met his wife, Lael, who was waiting for him with their young son, anxious to hear the news that he had just passed and received the PhD from Harvard University. But instead he had to tell her that he had failed and could not come back. It was a long drive back to Philadelphia, as you can imagine. And when they arrived, President Comfort was there, as was Douglas Steer, his dear friend Douglas Steer. And they were anxious to hear the news, and of course he had to tell them that he had failed. They immediately sought to console him, but he was so upset with himself, his wife said that she was even fearful that he would take his own life. You see, he was an academician, and he had failed that ultimate academic test. This was in October. Those were some terrible weeks between then and January. But something happened to that man. And he stood before Germantown Friends meeting on the outskirts of Philadelphia one January day. He'd been called to give a series of lectures. And he had all of his lectures typed and ready to go, and he was going to go through the motions. And he stood up to a group similar to this, I'm sure, a Germantown meeting, with his lecture notes in front of him, closed his folder, put it down, and said these words: "To you in this room who are seekers, to you young and old who have toiled all night and caught nothing, I want to speak as simply, as tenderly, as clearly as I can. For God can be found. God can be found. There is a last rock for your souls. There is a place of absolute serenity and peace." And before he was completed, there was not a dry eye in the auditorium, for everyone had learned of Thomas Kelly's difficulty. And so you see, dear friends, what was a failure in the eyes of men became a victory in the sight of God. And to this day we have that beautiful testimony of his, which was put together after his death, a mere 3 years after his conversion experience. Died of a massive heart attack. But before he died, he left this world one of the dearest books that's ever been written, entitled A Testament of Devotion. And Douglas Steere was able to put this together and write a brief biographical memoir and give it to the world. And it was that book that finally brought me to my knees, because that was my goal when I was younger, the perfect mind, the development of reason, you see. Academia was where I was headed, huh? It's a very seductive thing. Very seductive. Development of the mind. To be able to ridicule people with your mind, huh? And I grew up in college. I was a major in sociology. I was going into the ghettos. I was going to take care of these poor people. I was going out and I was going to develop human institutions. If only we had more money. If only we had more willing people, you see. And it came to me as I read Kelly that human institutions are not enough. The love of Christ has to be in those institutions if you want to change the world. And so my ministry grew out of that, and I wanted to share that with you. Whether in the 1st century or the 17th century or the 20th century, the Christian movement has owed its vitality to the fact that its members, like Thomas Kelly, have had a personal experience with Jesus Christ and have found in that experience a new interest in life, a new conviction, which leads them to vocation. This afternoon, I was led to read from Luke those wonderful words on the road to Emmaus. Luke 24, beginning with verse 13. That very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all of these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near to them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation which you are holding together as you walk together?" And they stood still, looking sad. And then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all of the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Dear friends, can you imagine three more difficult words, three words that are more sad than those? We had hoped. We had hoped. Yes, and besides all of this, it is now the third day since this happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. But him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He appeared to be going further. You see, the Christ is always appearing to be going further. He's always ahead of us. He appeared to be going further. But they constrained him, saying, "Stay with us. For it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened. And they recognized him. And then what happened? He vanished out of their sight. And they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 gathered together, and those who were with him, who said, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. They had a personal experience with the living Christ. That possibility is still here with us. Christ lives. The Lord is in this very room, Pastor Hogue. And throughout our history, the church owes its vitality to this fact, that people have met the living Christ. Throughout our 2,000-year-old history, thank God, hearts have burned within people, as on the Emmaus Road. And no matter to what source you turn, whether it's the letters of Paul whether it's the Confessions of Augustine or the Devotions of John Donne or the Journal of John Woolman or Hannah Whitehall Smith's The Christian Secret of a Happy Life or Thomas Kelly's Testament of Devotion, you encounter people about whom the last thing that you can say is that they are relying on rumor or hearsay. They know the living Christ. Praise God. They are speaking at first hand. They have deep convictions, convictions that have spurred them to action and involve them in repeated self-sacrifice. Repeated self-sacrifice. Have you ever thought how many of the great Christian books have been written behind prison bars? Think of the sacrifice that has come through our 2,000-year-old history. Of course, we think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship. We think of William Penn's Fruits of Solitude, which was written while he was under house arrest. We think of Paul writing to the church at Philippi. And on it goes. I know whom I have believed, says the Apostle Paul. And for him, this is the fundamental matter from which everything else stems. He knows in whom he believes. It is no cunningly devised fables that we're giving you, says the Apostle Peter, for we were eyewitnesses of Christ's majesty. Did not our hearts burn within us while we walked with him on the road? And friends, you can sense that having said that, these men feel that for them there is no more direct appeal to which to turn. And these are the same words that leaped off of the page while the early Quakers were spreading their gospel of new life throughout England, and as the Wesleys were doing the same, and on throughout the history of our world. And who can fail to detect the note of holy obedience? Well, these are qualities that we are in need of today. The contention of Berdyaev, the Russian theologian, is important for us to hear. There is no longer any room in the world for a merely external form of Christianity based upon custom. The world is entering upon a period of catastrophe and crisis when we are being forced to take sides and in which a higher and more intense kind of spiritual life will be demanded of Christians. The outward form and custom of the faith is not enough. The lack of true holy obedience in today's church is unmistakable. For many, worship has become a dull habit. Thank God not here. But I travel all over this country, and I experience many places where worship has become a dull habit, believe me. Where the fundamentals of the Christian religion are concerned, there is an alarming amount of vague thinking. I was sharing with the Sunday school this morning about the biblical illiteracy so prevalent in our day. Are you ready for these statistics? It shocked me. The Gallup poll, done recently, George Gallup, committed Christian, by the way. Over 50% of church attenders, not the unchurched, I'm talking about regular church attenders, do not know the four Gospels. They cannot name them. 47% of all church attenders can only recite 3 of the 10 commandments. Shocking. Here's the most shocking of all. 50% of all church attenders do not know who delivered the Sermon on the Mount. And we call ourselves a Christian nation. Shocking. There is an alarming amount of vague thinking. To great numbers of people, the Christian faith has come to mean nothing more than being kind and neighborly and doing good as opportunity arises, which is well enough in its own way, but it's certainly not the end-all of basic Christianity. You need to combine the mind with that heart and that loving concern. For religion in America, despite a steady increase in church membership and vastly improved conditions for Christian education, religious illiteracy constitutes a real problem. Many thousands of uninformed and misinformed people, lost in a wilderness of thinking. Here's a voice in the wilderness, though. Thank you for this, Brother Hogue. Thank you for that. This book has meant so much to me. Your pastor sent it to me following our time in Richmond. And I've been reading and underlining. You can see what I've been doing, waiting on God. You see how I've underlined it. It's so meaningful to me, and I thank you for it. But there are so many who are lost in the wilderness, and who don't hear the voice. And so they repeat vague generalities or other impressions that they have learned while a child, but not really, they haven't really developed their spiritual life since that time. I'm reminded of the story about the clergyman and the astronomer who were seated side by side in the airplane. Now, if you know this story, don't stop me. I'm going to tell it anyway. I love it. And as usually happens, and I'm sure it will happen with your pastor tomorrow as he gets on that plane, the subject of religion will come up with a fellow passenger. It always happens to me, and it's a great place to witness. They can't get up and leave, for one thing. And so the clergyman and this man of science were seated side by side. And after a while, the astronomer said, well, you know, Pastor, I can sum up my religion in one sentence. Wow, that's great. What is it? And so he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Simple and clear enough. Well, the clergyman was quiet for a while, and then he turned to the astronomer and he said, I can sum up the science of astronomy in one sentence. Oh, the great man of science was aghast at this, you see. This clergyman, who does he think he is? And so he asked him for it. And the clergyman said, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And you see, at that moment, the astronomer realized how silly his first statement had been. How simplistic, you see. Our Lord gave us minds. And my mentor, Elton Trueblood, is always stating deliberate mediocrity is a heresy and a sin. Develop your mind, dear friends. What such vagueness means for active and mature Christianity is only too obvious. It produces men and women who have no center for thought, no place to stand in this mobile world, and no incentive to action. They have no passionate attachment, no enthusiasm, nothing which awakens their enthusiasm or rouses their devotion and loyalty, and quite literally sweeps them off of their feet. Now, one cannot say that they're against Jesus Christ, because that just wouldn't be true. But on the other hand, they're not totally absorbed in His cause, not enthusiastic to help Him, not almost one-tracked about Jesus Christ as they are about business or football, or basketball. Oh, that hurts. I'm from Indiana, the home of Bobby Knight. Always when they speak of him, it is with grave respect. Often they do a little for him, but nothing that spells sacrifice, nothing that pushes them away from their main concerns in life, making money, or any of the other things that occupy their time. Nothing that upsets their own comforts, that means giving up anything that they really want. They're mildly Christian, but not very much. And it all runs back, in the end, to the absence in these brothers and sisters of the quality so apparent in every forward-moving epic in the life of the church, the absence of holy obedience, rooted and grounded in self-authenticating experience with the living Christ. Now, a sense of conviction rooted in fellowship with the living Christ always issues in a sense of vocation. Experience with the living Christ, the development of conviction through the life of thought, always issues in the third step, the life of vocation and ministry. If you believe anything, you become a motivator. If you believe that a certain medicine has helped you get over your cold, you're going to run out and tell your neighbor, listen, this NyQuil really works. You see, I want to tell you, I want to sing the praises of NyQuil. I took it last night. I'm a healed man this morning. Take NyQuil, you'll get over your cold, all right? If you really believe something, you're going to be motivated, you're going to share that with your neighbors. If you believe in a certain political theory that you believe will help the greatest number to the greatest happiness, then you're going to see that it's your task to go out there and get people to vote for that candidate. What you really prize, dear friends, you're going to share. What you really prize, you're going to share. People know a lot about you as a person by what you share with them. One of the great tasks of our generation is to revive experiential Christianity. Out of this comes conviction, and out of that comes vocation. I can't help but think this evening of how the experience with Christ led Paul on his missionary journeys to develop the church in Asia Minor and Europe. He was called to a vocation after that experience, you see. I can't help but think of William Penn, dear Anna, William Penn, who was called to develop what he called his holy experiment in the colony of Pennsylvania, which he wanted to call New Wales out of humility. He didn't want to call it Pennsylvania. He wanted to call it New Wales, but his followers wouldn't hear of it. The Church of Jesus Christ must help people recover the same spirit of experiential Christianity that will lead all of us here to new endeavors of Christian vocation. And the church will never do it until she is less timid and cautious and compromising and far more venturesome and aggressive. That's what we're called to be. She will never do it until the rank and file of her members know what they believe and why, and have for their master motive the spreading of the gospel the world over. And for too long, Christians have been accommodating Christians have been worldly wise and pliable, leaving their unbelieving neighbors unsure of what the church stands for, unless it's an easygoing toleration of things as they are. Salt and light. Those were the words that Jesus Christ used to describe the impact of his disciples on the world. Salt and light, elements of penetration, you see. You ever think about that? They're both elements of penetration. And today the greatest danger confronting the church is not that it will die. The church won't die. You know, the ever-present danger which confronts the church is that it may become indifferent. That it will stand for nothing in particular, hesitant, half-hearted, its message muffled and uncertain. And how is that to be prevented? How can we change that? When has the church been like salt and light? When has the church been militant in temperament? When has its influence been potent? My dear friends, the church has been closest to its calling when its members have been in close, intimate touch with the living light of Jesus Christ. And these are not just empty words I'm sharing with you tonight. It has been done, and it can be done again. I know whom I have believed, says Paul. Didn't our hearts burn within us as we walked on the road with him? Christ taught his followers to yield their faith to him. And in generation after generation, that is what many thousands have done. He has become the object of their faith, their light and their Lord. It is he who has inspired their sense of conviction, and it is from him that they have caught a sense of a new vocation.